So we're going to round out our conversation today with pro-social behavior and aggression. Now, if you remember last lesson, we talked about moral development and Kohlberg's moral development and how that plays out, how we progress through those three stages. The assignment that we have for this week kind of really gets you and I do that with all my assignments, I do that intentionally, is to give you insight as to where some of these principles come from within you, within your background, within your culture, and within your experiences, right? So that's why I find these little things, these little assignments very useful. But anyway, today let me share my screen with you. So I do have a lot of information I want to spend. I know I usually do little doodles and stuff, but for today, I'm going to give you the slide presentation. Death by PowerPoint is what we used to say in the military, right? All right. So isn't that what they say, James? Death by PowerPoint?
Absolutely. It's some form of death one way or another, because usually you're in a classroom for like 6 hours learning about, I don't know, something not relevant.
Right.
You're ever
Right, exactly. So I've got a short little presentation, and then I have a case study. I want to kind of kick out and see how y'all come up with some of the solutions and things that you can identify within that case study. So so today, again, we're going to talk about pro-social behavior, and hopefully you can see my screen here. And these are, I see these are like social behaviors, and these are something that make us feel good, right? And these are behaviors that people use that we want to feel important. We want to feel valued. We want to feel good about ourselves. So we are surrounded by lots and lots of pro-social behavior, even these days, right? Even with COVID going on, we certainly experience pro-social behavior in some form or another. And when we look at child development and pro-social behavior, we have kiddos, they really want to feel good with one another. Maybe they're helping one another, or maybe they're pretty young, but yet they're still sharing, and they're developing friendships based on pro-social behavior. And that could go either way. That could be positive interactions or negative interactions. And we're going to start off with the positive interactions for now, okay? So I guess when we talk about pro-social behaviors, sometimes we use words to describe social skills, and we use social competence. And so I just wanted to bring up a few of these definitions. I know your book gave you the definitions for them, but I do want to talk about them a little bit more because they're going to really feed into our understanding of how this develops over time. So the first one we have is social skills. So these are really a set of different behaviors that include social emotional behaviors, right? And we talked about that in previous lessons. So when we talk about social emotional skills, we're talking about hearing and being able to cooperate either through communication, like for example, saying I'm sorry to someone. Those are social skills. But social skills are also about respecting rules. Okay, so it's not necessarily things that we just communicate. It's about respecting rules and social norms, and it's even about respecting people as a whole. So I think probably one of the best examples when we're talking about children and child development is maybe earlier on starting to respect property, taking care of toys, right? I know it's a very, very broad skills, and we'll kind of get back to that, but that would be an example of improving social skills. So the next definition we have is social competence, and this is what we really mean by social competence. It's one thing to know that those skills that you possess, that you've witnessed those skills, that you've been exposed to those skills, but it's another thing to be able to use them in the context in the appropriate manner. So it needs to be adjusted when, like, for example, if many of you have parents and grandparents, right? So many of you have learned earlier on that there might be different things that you can do at your grandparents' house or your grandmother's house. Some rules are different from those. They might be different than when you're at your house, or maybe going to school, right? You wouldn't say things in school that you would normally say at home. And for children, we might expect them to act differently in schools or daycare centers versus parks and so on and so forth. But, being when we see a child, we know that whether or not social competence is there, we can see that he or she is adjusting. So it's referring to the flexibility that we've been discussing with self-regulation, if you remember that from our previous lesson. So it's not only that these skills, but sometimes children, will smile and they will do things, but children look at them and it seems, it might be a little awkward to do so in that context, right? So sometimes, these behaviors, we need to teach children how to use them and when to use them. And that's really the difference between social skills and social competence. Okay. So pro-social skills, going one step further, or pro-social behavior. They're behaviors that we use voluntarily to the benefit of others, really. So that means really making or acting in a way that's pleasing to somebody else. It's intentional, right? And when I know that I do this, I know I expect my friend will be happy about this gesture. So pro-social skills are really about something that is behaviors aimed at pleasing others. So that's what we look at with pro-social skills. So why does it matter? Why does really any of this matter? So these skills are very briefly, we know that they are related to peer acceptance as a whole, right? We as humans are pack animals. We know that we need to fit in with society in order to have greater strengths and survivability. So learning those earlier on, children, they are, we can say that children do this because they want other children to play with them. We know we can assess, and it's called sociometric assessment when we look at this, and we do this in groups of classes and groups of children. But we know that those children that are chosen in those groups, they like to play with their friends. They're having a good set of approach and social behavior, so they engage more positively with others. And so friends, they want to play with them and they become popular. But as adults, we appreciate those children, and sometimes, those behaviors for children having more challenges. We can say, let's say, like self-control. Say we have a child that is expressing themselves not too well. They lack self-control with their emotions. We as adults, we can say that their pro-social skills may not be as finely tuned, and that can affect really the parent-child interaction or the educator-child interaction. In what way, right? Think of maybe your own personal experiences, either with your own children or somebody else's children, or maybe even as an educator or as a counselor. All right, we see children that are challenged with self-regulation, or they lack certain pro-social skills that might impact how you talk with them, how you interact with them. So really, not only in between children do pro-social skills are they negatively impacting, but it could be long-term with either child rearing or educational. All right, so very, very important. And of course, peer and adult acceptance. I kind of touched upon that. All right. So specifically, those behaviors that are about pleasing others, they develop over time, and yes, there are a lot of differences linked to temperament and predisposition. We talked about that. All this comes from our parents and our genes and all of that. But an example of those behaviors, it's about being able to smile to somebody, and of course, when someone feels that smile, feels that happiness, they feel welcoming. Somebody that is not natural, now they might feel a little bit opposite of that. They might feel a little standoffish, right? So those pro-social skills, those behaviors are very, very important. I just noticed that my slides have kind of a British behaviors. Yeah, I apologize for that. Yeah, sometimes I throw that in there. I spent some time overseas, so occasionally these come out. So anyway, uh, uh, so smiling could garner good reactions, and of course not smiling could make us seem a little bit standoff. And of course we don't expect children to really master all of these, right, at a very young age. It's going to be a lot of training, a lot of work with them in order for them to get to that level, but we should have a pretty good grasp on them as we get into adolescence and especially adulthood, because if we don't by adulthood, we could see relationship problems, we could see inability to be productive in society, maybe not able to hold a job or make money or even master basic life skills. That could be problematic. So it's important that we kind of gauge this earlier on with children. We need to work on these behaviors within group settings. Okay, so within the classroom, that's another important part of it. Now, what happens in home? Again, looking at the context, what happens at home and how parents help children develop these skills. It's great. It's going to help with developing those moral boundaries and those ethics and those values. But when you get into a different context, like school setting, we're going to see problems develop if there's not proper guidance there as well. Okay. So those are some strategies that just to keep in mind. And we'll talk about maybe some ways, like for if you see to the right here, offering comfort, protecting, defending the rights of others, and inviting a friend to play. These are all just examples of things that that we can do. Okay. All right. So we do know that emotional competence are linked or affected by several things. Okay. I'm sorry, pro-social behavior. And the first one that we can look at is emotional competence. And this is really related to pro-social behavior. And something interesting with, we also have parenting styles. So parenting styles, I know your book covered it. We didn't necessarily go over it in our lesson. I think we touched upon it briefly, but parenting styles, being warm and responsive parents, and doing that as caregivers, right? Or as educators. We can still have even parenting styles for many of you that are going to be working with young children. Although you are working with groups, you're still kind of developing that parenting style for them. It's just in a different context. So, but there are studies that show that children use more pro-social behaviors, and that may affect how their mothers, because sometimes the studies and different studies about mothers, they could see that that there might be an effect on mother sensitivity to children with social behavior. So it's kind of it's a symbiotic flow back and forth. So a mother that might be standoffish is going to create an environment where a child might learn to be standoffish and not develop pro-social behaviors, which in turn affects the mother's sensitivity and nurturing for the child. So it's a vicious cycle in that respect. The parents who have pro-social behaviors, it seems to impact them in a positive way. It goes without saying, right? So something to look at, like as educators and as counselors, is to maybe look at some of these, and there are ways to gauge it. There are lots of evaluative tools out there that we can use to look at emotional competence, right? Where is their moral development? We did an example of that on during our last lecture. Where is their moral development? What level, right? Are they more authoritative? I mean, because that could, if it looks like they're more about consequences, then we will probably see some kind of strict guidance from the parents some way, some more authoritarian style parenting, right? We can, if we're seeing difficulties in pro-social behaviors, that might be a trickle down from the parents' pro-social behavior. because we look at them as role models. We look at them as doing things and presenting certain ways to deal with conflict. So that might be a problem. Discipline style, authoritative versus communication practices, right? Discipline is not necessarily a bad thing. Discipline is guidance, and discipline can be used in a very, very positive and constructive way. So when I say discipline, a lot of people tense up and they think, oh my gosh, it's a negative thing. I think discipline, maybe paddling or spanking or something like that. And yes, those are included in discipline styles. They aren't all encompassing. So discipline could be something as soft as taking something away from a child and then explaining to them why that happened that way. And that really enforces the communication style, which in turn really bolsters their pro-social behavior through not only being able to express themselves, but also being able to kind of work through that problem in a positive way. All right. And of course, the last one there is parents' emotional competence, their ability to, maybe they learned some bad skills when they were children or growing up. So being able to help them understand their emotional competence might assist them, and it happens a lot. My work with kiddos that are experiencing like behavioral issues or emotional regulation issues. That's really a majority of it. Looking at where the parents' emotional competencies are and working and guiding them into maybe learning some new skills. And a lot of it is parenting skills, helping them out with that. And there are a lot of great programs and educational tools that can help them with parenting. I'll give you an example. Timeouts. I love timeout. I don't like being in timeout, but I like to help people with timeout, because timeout is a very, very effective way to guide behavior, especially with emotional disruptions. But there's an effective way to do timeout, and then there's an ineffective way to do timeout. And I think the most common perception is if I put them in a corner, they'll fix themselves and they can't get out of the corner until they come out. Kind of, that's the spirit behind it, but we want to have structure around it. We want to put them out of isolation. We don't want them to be part of the group where disruption is going to continue, or bad behaviors or bad decisions are going to continue. Give them a little bit of time to reduce their anxiety, reduce their autonomic nervous system, because they're worked up. So give them a chance to cool down, and then use those communication tools to explain why that happened, and being consistent and letting them know this is going to happen every time. So anyway, there really is a science to that. But what I find most often that happens when timeout is ineffective, it's usually because the parents aren't using it exactly correctly, and guiding them to use that effectively is more important. Okay. All right. So let's look at the developmental perspective over time, and linked with moral development. We can kind of see, we didn't really talk a lot about age with moral development, especially with Kohlberg. We kind of just guesstimated around the age we see this stuff, but we can see pretty advanced adolescence. We can see even 12-year-olds that have they're at that higher moral level, like stayed at the conventional level, conventional stage, level 4 or something like that, right? Able to understand authority, or even post-conventional in some cases. So these aren't really fast and hard rules with the ages, right? But it gives us kind of a guide and what we've seen with research. So I guess that most people, let me kind of toss this out there and ask, what do you know about age and morals? What do you know about age and social behaviors? A lot of you have probably read the book, but most people by the age of 2 show the first signs of social behaviors, right? Because we can overtly observe them. But it really starts before that even. And if you're somebody that's trained in looking at that, you would certainly be able to see that as well. But most people see the observable signs of social behavior because we use words. And when children start using words, we can start seeing that sociability. Okay. But we can really detect, and if you know what to look for, we can detect social behaviors or pro-social behaviors around 6 months of age. All right. And studies showing that children prefer people or adults that are offering uh, more than people that are destroying that they aren't destroying things, right? So this is something that it was really made true with puppets. If we had an example of puppets that were smashing things or puppets that were warm and friendly and talking to each other, we can see that the children tend to look at that. Children as early as 6 months start paying attention to those things, whereas children start smashing things, that might we might start seeing a little bit of apprehension to those puppets doing that. And that's usually marked by feeling insecure, either closed off through body language, putting their fingers in their mouth or something like that, right? Usually around the age of 1 or 2, we see the first observations of guilt, feeling of guilt. We addressed guilt before, and that's one of the emotional expressions that we described. And it's some children may be observed as being a little bit more naturally guiltier than others. Some of them have overt guilt and others may be a little bit more subdued in how they express those feelings. And again, a great example would be children that put fingers in their mouth. But by the age of 2, we're going to see a little bit more intricate behaviors with insecurity and guilt. And that might be through the act of moving. They might be moving a certain way, like moving away from something, turning their back to something, or even retreating to a safety measure like a blanket. And I think many children have security blankets, either in the metaphorical or literal sense. But paying attention to children that are constantly looking for that security might be an indication of guilt, and that's something to keep an eye on. So giving them something a little bit more comfortable, and it's important for them to have that sense of comfort. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have that, but too much reliance on that might keep them withdrawn from engaging in other pro-social behaviors and learning new skills. So it starts really around here, around where we see those around these ages. Let's see, age 2, and it's really about 3 that we observe more intricate movements, right? It gets even more as they grow a little bit older. So understand a little bit that they might be breaking the rules, right? Terrible twos. But that's where they start developing that concept that with actions come consequences. And we see that when others, when they start interacting with others around this age, they understand it's wrong, and they might feel bad and we're able to observe them experiencing those distress. And we as parents, or we as caregivers and educators, we might say, oh my gosh, he's in trouble because he did that bad thing. And we got to be very careful how we present that to them, because it might be problematic for us. It might be problematic behaviors, but they're still exploring. They're exploring what's right and what's good. And even when they get into age 3 or 4, we're going to see a lot more behaviors where they might start engaging in aggression. Okay, aggression happens, but working with them to explain why aggression is not good, showing that if it's not an effective way of doing it, and that there's an easier way to do that, giving them tools and words to resolve that conflict without aggression. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a bit. But they start understanding at right around 3 or 4. They understand that I might lose something. So if Billy and Susie are hanging out with each other and they're playing blocks, and Billy gets upset and smashes Susie over the head, and Susie throws blocks all over him, and they before you know it, they're crying and yelling, and things aren't good. The positive lesson that should come out of that is, I'm going to lose. As a child, as a kiddo, I'm going to lose my rights to play with that toy or play with Susie or whatever. And making that connection for them, helping them to make that connection, that around that age, if we don't adhere to pro-social standards or values, then we're going to take something and put that up. And they start getting that right around the age of 3 or 4. Okay. And again, and I do want to point that that it's important to understand that there's a systematic way to do that. And when we look at grounding, I think I've shared this with some of my other lectures, some of my other classes, that parents that take things away from children, there has to be, again, that communication, there has to be that understanding, there has to be a reward built in for them getting it back. There's a lot of things to do that, and we can evaluate many that are going into child behavior. You'll learn about ABCs, the antecedent behavior and consequences, or you may learn about functional behavior analysis. Okay, these are all things geared towards dissecting what the action is, what caused that action, and where the reward is. Okay, how are they being rewarded, and then going back, putting that into a feedback loop to alter their environment a little bit to change that behavior. Remember, we were talking about operant learning. That's very much what operant learning, operant conditioning looks like in the field. So ABC is very powerful stuff. Functional FBA, functional behavior analysis. That's some really good stuff. And unfortunately, we don't have time to cover it in this course, but many of you that are going on to education or special education or anything like that, you'll likely learn about those things. All right, so let's look at aggression. Okay, let's see what. Okay, all right. So you can see that we've talked about, and your book talks about aggressive behaviors occurring in daycare, within our schools, even, right? We know about bullying, and we can link the frequency of aggression, really looking at coming down to how we can measure empathy and pro-social behaviors. So I'm just curious, does anybody really have an idea of what age group they think is probably where a person expresses the most aggression?
I think like the age of like 7 and 9.
Okay.
I was gonna say, like, based off my little sister, like 4 to 9, like in that range of the, like 4 to 9 is the range, I would say.
Okay. All right. 4 to 9. So I'm hearing like 4 to 12, somewhere in that range.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's around that range. Never, my little cousin used to be a bully.
Well, now let me kind of demystify that here for you a little bit. People that don't work with children professionally, or don't have children of their own, they might tend to say that it is a little bit more on the older side. And really, I'm sure a lot of you probably haven't spoken up, but many of you were probably thinking a little bit later, right? And that's because that's how we measure aggression. That's how we observe aggression in other people. So we would say that it's higher frequency in higher ages. But aggression behavior, the frequency, it's really between, we really start seeing that peak up around 18 to 24 months. Now, again, we just might attribute it to being, they're just being an infant. That's just what infants and toddlers do. Terrible twos. It's so profound that we even have a name for it. Terrible twos, right? How many of you have heard that expression before? It's because that's where they're starting to they're starting to challenge authority a little bit more. They're starting to understand that these aggressions, right? They're training the parents. They're understanding that these aggressions get them what they want. I think I shared with you little Billy in Walmart at midnight wants his big red ball, and he's going to throw a tantrum until his dad gets him that ball. So that's where they start learning this stuff. And this is kind of where we start guiding that behavior. So really, in all honesty, it's right around 2-3 years old that we see probably the most aggressive behaviors start to rise up. Now, again, left untreated, left unchecked, when they get a little bit older, we're going to see higher levels of aggression, higher intensity, more frequency, and that stuff. But usually, that this is where it starts, right around 2 or 3 years old. So there are ways to explain um, how you know these aggressive behaviors go down with age and specialization. And understanding rules and moral development, they all feed into this as well. So, but it also comes with knowing empathy and understanding how empathy really plays a big part into children. Okay, so just briefly, empathy is defined as an emotional response that comes with understanding of the emotional state of another person. So it's not just about feeling what that other person is feeling, but it's more about understanding that I can feel what they feel. If they did this to me, we talked about mirroring in their neurons, right? If they witness something, they can almost feel, or if they act a certain way, they can almost feel how that other person feels. That's empathy. Okay. And children, it's really important to figure out a way to gauge that and have conversations with them when they're able to. There's a cognitive component to understanding the emotions of others, right? And that's how we know by age 3 we start even around 2, even half of more, we can see that there's more of an understanding of others' intentions, right? So they may start developing, if we think back to the Piaget, they start developing that break out of egocentrism, and they understand that other people might have other intentions other than what they're thinking themselves, right? So that's kind of relating it back to cognitive development. But there is the understanding of things that you help to know the development of empathy, and also disciplinary styles. We're kind of back to that, looking at and I'm not going to go through each one of those disciplinary styles. I don't think I have time today to do that. So reduction of aggression into empathy and pro-social skills. So we know that supporting empathy may be the key, but if we look a little bit more into detail, will aggressive behavior, is it complex? Well, I mean, it is complex, and there are tons of things that we can say about that, right? And a lot of you have ideas of what aggression looks like. It could be throwing a tantrum. It could be hitting somebody, right? It could be just going into a complete tailspin. We've seen that a lot. So anyway, I just want to address, like in earlier years, the two big style of aggression that we see. And the first one is called proactive aggression, and the other one's called reactive aggression. And these are both so the proactive aggression, it's described as instrument aggression, as it's used as an instrument to reach a goal. Okay, so we know that we want access to a toy. We want that toy, either it's somewhere where we can't get it, or somebody else is playing with that toy. So I will do what I have to do. I'll bite, kick, chew, hit, whatever I need to do to get whoever's holding that toy to give me that toy. And of course, it's not intentional. The intent is not about hurting the other person. And that's why it's called instrument, right? Because we're using that aggression as an instrument to get something we want, not necessarily hurt the other person. We know if the other person gets hurt, they'll stop what they're doing, and then we can gain access. So that's what proactive aggression is. It's instrumental. So the other one that we, and just to kind of backpedal on proactive aggression, again, observation is very, very important. Okay, and we have to look at how disciplinary actions occur, because yeah, we want to correct that behavior, but at the same time, we don't want to correct it so harshly that it becomes subdued, it becomes unobservable, and now we have oppositional defiance going, right? The two children might be playing just great, but as soon as we turn our backs, now we've got a slugfest. We've got blocks thrown all over. We got hair pulled. We got bite marks. Not good things. So again, paying attention to how we communicate that and doing this right, addressing those issues, those behaviors right, is very important for proactive aggression. All right. So The retroactive aggression. So a little bit different. All right. It's really not about difficulties with dealing with emotions. It has more to do with dealing with emotions, and we're going to see more of explosions in the. I'm sorry, not retroactive, reactive. Did I say retro? I think I said retroactive, reactive aggression. So when they explode, say they get really frustrated, they get really furious, and they just blow up. They may not intentionally want to hurt somebody, but they do. Okay, it's just kind of they're a bystander, kind of a tornado. Just everything gets sucked up in that whirlwind of fury, like the Tasmanian devil or whatever. So our target about working with emotional regulation is ensuring that children develop more of an inhibition to lower their impulsivity levels. Okay, that's important. That's especially in young children. So maybe giving them a chance to sit and think and understand that there are better ways to deal with these emotions. And we talked about that last week, right? In our previous lesson. So those are very important to understand with pro-social behaviors, because nobody's perfect. Nobody comes out just talking and being charismatic and getting what they want and having perfect regulation of their moods and their emotions. It just doesn't happen, and there's going to be varying degrees. And some of it, a lot of it is based on environment. Some of it, again, might be genetic, might be hereditary, right? The temperament. There are some things that we can't control, but we can certainly alter the environment to better suit that child so that they have a better chance of success in wherever they are. Okay. So what can we do? What are some tips and tricks that we can do? All right. So the first strategy, it's pretty much related to the development of empathy and pro-social skills as a whole, and to use a type of discipline that we would call we call it inductive discipline. And it's not important, but you know the words, they have certain meanings to it. So it's induction, and with children, how to explain why the gesture you think is their behavior was either good or not good, right? So making inferences, helping them understand, helping them gain that empathy, it is really what happens during inductive discipline. So you're taking their environment and wrapping around. You're not just focusing on that behavior, you're focusing on the feelings of others. You're focusing on your feelings and how it makes you feel. So you're kind of wrapping everything into one, not to the point to make them feel guilty, but for the purpose of letting them aware, making them aware of what is happening around them, because they're curious. They don't understand why they can't have their toy. They don't understand why they can't get what they want for dinner. They get those chicken nuggets every night. I see that a lot. So it's important to kind of give them the ability to look around them and absorb their environment. So crying's going to happen, right? So inductive discipline is all about using those moments to make those understanding what's happening to them, the reason behind the impact of their consequence. Okay, if that makes sense. It's not about punishing, it's about explaining the impact of the gestures. All right. And even I would go so far, and I think this is important for parents to understand as well. All right. So before I go on to that one, I think it's important for parents to understand as well the, I think I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Yeah, lost it. Sorry. So for parents as well, you know, this is something that parents can do, and as well as educators and teachers, explain why we have rules in that group or in that house, why they are important. Okay. We don't throw toys because we could hurt ourselves, because we could break that toy, and you could not have it again. So they may not understand bigger pictures, like if mom and dad get upset, then they're not going to be able to function well. You know, they don't understand at that level, but kind of helping them, guide them along at the very smallest level, and saying, you know, having conversations with them after certain transgressions occur, right? That instead of making them harmful, turning them into learning moments. Okay. As far as the strength of a positive climate in a group, it's related to pro-social behavior in that they are developing within that house, within that classroom, and with the parents and with the teachers. We're developing a positive climate around them. So as educators, we feel a sense of, we want to instill a sense of belonging, right? We want to have a group name. We want to have a group song, right? We want to establish an identity within the group. And when they can establish that identity, they start feeling support from with that. They feel like they belong in something. So that might be a trick that people can use in the classroom, or families use that all the time. I remember a specific thing that we did every year. We had this huge, I come from a very, very big family, and my parents dressed me and my brothers in the exact same outfits, even though we're about 10 years difference between between me and my youngest brother. We all had to dress in the same thing. And we thought that was silly, and we thought that was a little weird, but what they were building was a sense of identity, within that family unit. So those little things, I mean, it sounds weird and doesn't sound like it would be that important, but it could be. And just reinforcing that, right? All right, every child has his or her own pace, and every effort is worth being reinforced. Okay, and again, just every little thing might be helpful. All right. And this great friendship. I love this picture because if you look at it a little bit more closely, you can see that that both children that you have on your left, you have oops, sorry, going back and forth here. Actually, I think I got you have the stack of toys on the left there, and there's something happening, but they're having an interaction. They're exploring what it is to share, and hopefully both of them are getting a positive interaction from that. But again, if emotions flare up and we have a reactive aggression style that just happens to come up, and it will happen likely, being able to re-guide and redirect those behaviors. And I thought I was expressing in this picture specifically pro-social skills and what they're about. And we know that it's not about, again, it's not about what we learn, it's the context in which we learn it. So this child is probably acting a little bit different with this child-to-child interaction than they would with a parent-child interaction. So encouraging the definition, encouraging friendships through just physical proximity. A lot of parents subscribe to play dates. I think these are a great idea. In this day, a little bit tougher to do, but getting those pro-social skills built up and encouraging those interactions to happen, even if they don't happen well, it's still a learning moment. So, proximity is the key here, is just having them around other children to do that. Okay. All right. And we've covered this in the past, but something is pretend play. It's something we should do again and again and again, as something we should encourage, especially if we have those proximity play dates or something like that. That encourages self-regulation. It helps them pretend and act out certain situations. When they encounter conflict, they learn to deal with that a little bit more effectively, right? Because they've experienced that. It gets them to test strategies and say things, right? They'll start communicating because they'll see that communications and actions and gestures might prove to be successful for them. And with emotional competence, we can say that around these templates here that we've seen, there's something about emotion, no security that really comes with it. This is kind of like a live exercise here, for them to experience what they do know, take those skills that they've applied at home or at school and just kind of turn them loose and see how things go, right? And I always look at it from a parental, especially parents that are very, very concerned about their children and the safety of their children. They might worry that a child saying something or doing something they might need to interfere. Not always. Unless safety is a concern, I always recommend that the parents just kind of hang back, observe, and listen to how things are going, right? Not indicating what they should and should not say or how they should or should not play. But the more interactions they have with other children, that'll kind of give them more and more tools. So that's why I say pretend play again and again and again is really important. Okay. All right. So that is all that I have for the lecture. What I do want to do is kind of turn this loose to, in the remainder of the time that we have, turn this loose to the groups here. I'm going to put everybody in about maybe groups of 4. Okay, I think groups of 4 or 5 maybe. And what I'm going to have you do is go into D2L and either download. I've got within week 11 resources. I have case study, chapter 12 case study. It's either PDF or doc, whichever one you want to use. Go ahead, download that, and when you get into your groups, just go ahead and discuss what some of what the answers to those are. Okay. Any questions or any comments before we break off into groups? And why am I not seeing groups? Breakout rooms. Okay, there we go. All right, so welcome back. What did you come up with? So for the first one, who would you say as a preschooler would say is more bad, quote unquote, Marcia or Steven, and why? What'd you come up with?
I was thinking that Marcia would be worse because she stole from her mother, and that the other child would think that would be worse, stealing from a parent.
Okay. And why is that? Why would that be worse, according to Steven, either Steven or Marcia? Why would Marcia say that Steven is more bad?
Because they know that the parent is in charge and they shouldn't do that without asking first, and that they should have asked the mother, and then if she said yes, then they could have taken the money.
Okay, it's very black and white for children of that age, right? If you think about that, Marcia probably doesn't understand at this point, or preschoolers for that matter, they don't understand intentions. They're not able to really think abstractly or hypothetically or anything like that. They just know the difference between good and bad, which you're right. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Did anybody have a different answer? And if so, why? I wouldn't say it's necessarily right or wrong that Marcia would say that. There are certain theorists that would say something different. But does anybody have Steven as more bad?
We had Steven as more bad.
Okay, and what was your reasoning behind that?
Without thinking about the fact that preschoolers might not, we thought long, but the preschoolers might understand that what she was stealing, taking the money was for it to help someone else. But we thought that the preschooler might understand that what Steven did was kind of more focused on himself, and that he just wanted to get the money to take from her to buy the ice cream.
Okay. And that could really indicate that there's a an impulsivity issue there almost, right? Because at that age, they should understand the consequences. And if they're saying to heck with consequences, that might be an impulsivity issue. So maybe if that was occurring. So I would say in that case, Steven would probably be described by Marcia as more bad, but vice versa. When we look at the developmental models, we certainly would say that if they're not able at that age, they're not able to understand intentions, and therefore they're looking more at it from a consequences base. But absolutely. All right. How about number 2? What did you get for number 2? After Steven bought ice cream, after he bought the ice cream sandwich, he tripped and fell on the front step, scraping his knee. How would a preschooler explain this accident?
Can I go?
Go ahead.
Okay, so So we said something about like karma, but we said that like preschoolers probably wouldn't know about karma. So more just like bad luck for taking the money out of the box.
Okay, he went karma. Okay, I think that's the first time I've gotten that as a response. All right, so how about somebody else? Okay, I see your point there. So like just like bad energy or of some sort. Okay, how can we describe that a little bit more succinctly? I think you're on the right path there. What was the consequence of him stealing?
Well, he had stolen earlier, so he tripped and like scraped his knee. Like that was his consequence because of it.
Yeah, it was a punishment, right? It was an imminent justice kind of, I guess, going along the lines of karma. Okay, all right. How about number 3? What would you get for describe some of the skills and variables, situational variables that are influencing Marcia's altruism here?
I guess sorry, I drew a blank for like 3 seconds. I was gonna say some of the skills or like the reasons behind like why she took the money from her mom might have been something like her parents taught her, like maybe if you're helping someone out, it's good to help someone out if you have to kind of blur the line a little bit, but she might not have understood like there's a line between like stealing and helping someone out.
Right. And what do we call that? If she is able to, I mean, expand her behaviors to include feeling as that other person feels, what do we call that?
Empathy?
What, one more time?
Was it empathy?
Empathy, absolutely, right? Her mood is it's positive, right? And her even though her consequences might have been a little skewed, it was for the sake of altruism. It was because she was able to empathize. Absolutely. All right. How about so what do you think? If what should Marcia's mom do to encourage this behavior?
We had said it was like along the lines of trying to explain to Marcy that what she did to help someone else was good, but the act of taking the money from the person while asking was bad, without diminishing the fact that she did it for a good reason so that she could continue to maybe focus on, okay, it's all right to do good things for other people, but I also have to make sure I go the right way, if there's a right way that's like straightforward.
Okay. So building up on the positives that she had from that situation, and kind of redirecting or giving her other options for the negative parts of that behavior, right? Absolutely, and that's something we talked about context in our lesson today. When is it appropriate to behave or do certain things? It's not bad to care for somebody, but it's bad if you hurt somebody else to take care of that person. And that's the kind of guidance, that's the role model and communication that we want to really develop with them. Okay. And how about the last one here? What should Stephen's mom do to discourage Stephen's inappropriate behaviors? What do you think? Maybe another group we haven't heard from yet.
I mean, I can still go.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, she should like explain to him that what he like what happens when he steals, especially like in this situation, like he stole from a charity box.
Mm-hmm.
So the mom could explain like in a way, well, now that you've taken money out of the charity box, kids who need that money to survive, like will no longer be able to get the money.
Absolutely. So instilling that sense of empathy without, and again, this is one of those things that you really have to think about ahead of time. And I always recommend taking a step back, think about it for a half an hour. It's not important that you get around to discussing it with them immediately, but the last thing we want to do is instill a sense of guilt. A little guilt is okay, but if they're constantly feeling guilty, that could be problematic later on in life and have a negative consequence on their self-esteem. So instilling empathy. How would you feel if somebody did this to you? That's probably the most powerful statement that you can make. Or connecting it with some kind of service reaction, right? Since you did this, now well, let's go to the soup kitchen, and we're going to volunteer so that you can see what poor people that don't have these things, what that's like for them. You know, connecting it with some kind of service would be helpful. But all right. So y'all did really good with that. Was that a good example? Was that a good case study to kind of illustrate what we're talking about with moral principles? All right, any questions, or does anybody have anything they want to add? Okay. All right, so that's all.